The cameras were already rolling. Millions were watching. The debate stage pulsed with tension. Bright lights, sweating brows, shallow breaths behind rehearsed smiles. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat poised, her hands folded tightly, the way someone holds back a storm. Across from her, J.D. Vance waited, silent, calculating. And beside him, with that signature smug grin, sat former President Donald Trump, his presence alone drawing gasps from the studio audience. The moderator cleared his throat. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, your response?" Alexandria didn't flinch. She leaned forward, voice steady, but her eyes blazed. Donald Trump is a thug, and the world knows it. The word thug cracked like lightning. The audience gasped audibly. The studio fell still, frozen. Not a chair creaked, not a breath. Trump raised his eyebrows, lips curled in amusement. J.D. Vance blinked once, slowly. The moderator stammered. Even those watching at home felt it, the tremble, the daring, the bold truth too many had only whispered. But no one expected what came next. J.D. Vance leaned forward, calm, and said one sentence. Just one. Alexandria's eyes widened. She wasn't prepared. No one was. And in that split second, the energy in the room shifted forever. J.D. Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He simply leaned into his microphone, eyes fixed on AOC, and said, "Funny." From someone who called her own grandmother a burden. The room stopped breathing. Alexandria's face changed, not in shame, but in something deeper, something raw. Her lips parted slightly, her fingers curled against the table. For a split second, the strength in her seemed to falter. But she didn't look away. The audience was lost. Some confused, others tense. Most didn't know the story. But Alexandria did. And J.D. Vance had just dragged a personal moment into the spotlight. A moment she had buried. It was a reference to a tweet, years ago, during the height of the pandemic, when Alexandria had spoken out about her abuela's suffering, how her grandmother's home in Puerto Rico was crumbling while politicians sat silent. She had begged for help, not pity. She had cried when no one listened. And now it was being twisted against her. The cameras didn't cut. They zoomed in. Millions watched her blink away pain. But Alexandria didn't back down. She sat up straighter. "I loved my grandmother," she said softly, "and I fought for her. Did you?" A hush blanketed the room, heavier than before. Even Trump, who usually thrived in chaos, glanced sideways at Vance, surprised. The jab had been effective, but it had hit something deeper than politics. It had pierced humanity. Alexandria's voice had trembled, but she hadn't broken. She hadn't lashed out or crumbled. She had met the cruelty with calm. The moderator, unsure what to do, tried to shift the conversation, but the air wouldn't move. A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. A staffer backstage quietly whispered, "She's going to flip this." Alexandria took a breath. "My grandmother taught me how to stand when everything around you collapses," she said. "She taught me that silence in the face of cruelty is complicity. So when I speak, when I dare to speak, it's because she can't." Her voice was steady now. The studio lights caught the sheen in her eyes, but she didn't look away from J.D. Vance. "You think politics is a game," she continued, "but some of us carry pain that didn't come from podiums and polls. Some of us lived what you mock." And suddenly, J.D. Vance wasn't the calm one anymore. His hands twitched. The nation leaned in closer. The room was still locked in silence, but something had shifted. Alexandria didn't just speak for herself anymore. "When I talked about my grandmother," she said, "I was talking about every family that's been ignored, every single person whose pain didn't fit into your polished speeches." J.D. Vance tried to interrupt. She didn't let him. "You know what hurts?" she continued. not just being called emotional, dramatic, angry. What hurts is watching roofs collapse on elders while billionaires fly to space. What hurts is asking for help and being mocked. Trump scoffed under his breath, but she ignored him. Behind her words was a deeper truth. This wasn't about scoring points. This was about wounds America had forgotten. The kind that don't make headlines. The kind that stay in your chest for years. J.D. Vance shifted in his seat. He hadn't expected her to take his blow and turn it into fire. In the front row, a woman clutched her chest. Her son had died waiting for medicine. AOC looked straight into the camera now. This isn't politics to me, it's personal. And just like that, 1,000 people at home began to cry. Because she was speaking their story too. In the second row, a woman wearing a pale green dress stood up. She was trembling. No one knew who she was. Cameras didn't focus on her, but her presence rippled like a quiet scream. She held up a photo, old, wrinkled, slightly torn. It was her son, a veteran, young, brown-skinned, dead from a preventable overdose. Security moved to stop her, but Alexandria raised her hand. "Let her speak," she said gently. The woman didn't speak loudly, just enough for the mic to catch. "My son died because no one listened when I begged for help. You all were too busy shouting." Her eyes flicked toward J.D. Vance, then Trump. "Thug," she whispered. "I've seen thugs in my own neighborhood, but I've also seen thugs in suits making laws that crush us." Alexandria's eyes filled with tears. She didn't grandstand. She walked off the stage and embraced the woman. And it wasn't performative. It was human. J.D. Vance looked down, shaken. Suddenly, this wasn't about debates anymore. It was about pain. Real pain. And for a brief moment, America stopped fighting and started listening. J.D. Vance tried to maintain composure, but the damage was done. The woman in the green dress had said more with her grief than any politician could in 1,000 words. The debate wasn't going the way he had expected. He thought he'd corner AOC, make her emotional, unstable. Instead, she had become something more powerful, human. He looked over at Trump, but Trump's arms were crossed, jaw clenched. Even he didn't have a line ready. The moderator struggled to pull the program back on track, but the tension in the room had changed. The audience wasn't here for spectacle anymore. They were here for truth. J.D. cleared his throat. He finally spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt you personally," he said, addressing AOC. "But sometimes we need to talk tough." Alexandria didn't snap back. She nodded slowly. "Then let's talk tough," she said. "Let's talk about why people like that woman have to beg to be seen. Let's talk about who's really being protected and who's being left behind." The audience applauded, but it wasn't wild. It was heavy, because the message had landed. And in that moment, J.D. Vance looked away, and the world knew. He didn't have an answer. The air was still tight when a voice rang out from the other side of the stage. It was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Her tone was calm, but her presence shook the room. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply stood, tall, steady, and real. "You know," Jasmine began, "we keep having the wrong conversations. We talk about who looked weak, who looked strong, who scored points." She turned to the audience, her voice cracking slightly. "But my mother worked 3 jobs. My uncle died waiting on a liver transplant. And nobody called a town hall to fix it." The audience was dead silent. "I've been called angry before. I've been told I lack decorum. I've been interrupted more times than I can count, but I show up every day anyway." She looked at J.D. Vance now. "You don't scare me." She walked over to Alexandria and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to carry this alone." That's when people started clapping. not because it was political, but because it was real. A unity was forming, not rehearsed, not written into talking points. It was raw. And America was watching with tears in their eyes. Within minutes, the internet exploded. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's quiet, piercing words flooded social media. Millions watched her extend a hand to AOC. Millions more rewatched the moment when the woman in green shared her grief. Hashtags trended. We see you. This is real politics. Crockett unfiltered. But it wasn't the sound bites that held people. It was the feeling. A mother in Detroit posted, "I cried. I felt seen for the first time in years." A teacher in Alabama wrote, "That's what leadership looks like." And in homes across America, families sat together, quiet, hearts wide open. Not everyone agreed politically, but everyone felt something. Meanwhile, back in the studio, J.D. Vance sat unusually still. The smugness had faded. He looked human, even a little unsure. Trump, on the other hand, leaned back, arms folded tightly. He whispered something to his aide, but even his team looked shaken. They knew the shift had begun. This wasn't about who won the debate anymore. This was about who touched a nerve, who told the truth, who made people feel something they hadn't in a long time. Hope. The moderator tried to steer the discussion back to policies, taxes, defense spending, energy reform, but no one cared. Not now. Suddenly, a stagehand rolled out a single empty chair. It wasn't planned. It wasn't scripted. It belonged to the woman in the green dress. She had quietly left after speaking. No cameras followed her. But her chair sat there now like a monument. Jasmine turned to it. "This chair," she said, "is for every person who's not in this room, for every voice that's never heard on a stage like this." She paused. "For the people buried by bad policy, for the forgotten." Her words hit like thunder, but not loud thunder, the kind that rumbles in your bones. AOC nodded silently beside her. Even J.D. Vance looked over at the chair. And for the first time, the camera caught something small, but unforgettable. His fingers were trembling, because suddenly, he wasn't debating two women anymore. He was facing something much heavier. He was facing truth. The kind of truth that doesn't yell or gloat. The kind that makes grown men blink hard to hide the tears. And that night, across the country, many did. The debate resumed, but it felt like walking through smoke. The moderator asked about inflation, about policy, but no one answered with numbers. Not anymore. AOC sat in still silence, her hands folded. Jasmine beside her, heart beating fast. J.D. Vance kept glancing toward the empty chair, the one meant to be invisible. But now, it owned the room. Finally, Jasmine spoke again. "We keep asking the wrong questions," she said softly. "You want numbers, budgets, arguments. But what about grief?" She turned to the audience. "Raise your hand if you've lost someone because of a policy. Not a gun or a war, but something written in ink. Something silent." Hands rose. First one, then 5, then dozens. A woman in the back whispered, "My son." A man near the front, "My mother, Medicaid delay." It wasn't a debate anymore. It was a confession, a release. Even J.D. Vance couldn't hide the tension in his jaw. He tried to respond. "This isn't about feelings, it's about facts." But his voice cracked mid-sentence. The truth was heavier than his words, and for the first time, he realized he might be wrong. A voice from the far corner stopped everything. "I voted for Trump, twice." All heads turned. A man in a weathered brown hat stood up. His jeans were worn, his eyes red. "I thought he was fighting for people like me." His voice didn't shake, but his hands did. "My brother died last year, cancer. We had to sell his truck just to pay for morphine." The studio fell into absolute silence. I thought we were the forgotten ones, the working class, and maybe we were. But now I see." He turned to Jasmine and AOC. "I see I'm not the only one forgotten." He looked at the empty chair, then slowly sat down. Not to argue, not to fight, just to listen. J.D. Vance stared at the man like he'd never seen him before. And AOC? She got up, walked across the stage, and sat in the empty chair. "I'll sit here," she said, "until the people in this seat get justice." The audience rose to their feet. No cheering, no yelling, just standing. Together. Something sacred was happening, and the cameras kept rolling. She sat in that chair like it belonged to her. Alexandria crossed her arms tightly, blinking fast. But the tears came anyway, and she let them. Not in weakness, in surrender. To the truth. My grandmother used to say, "Mija, the world will call you loud when you're simply not lying." She wiped her cheek. "I didn't come here tonight to cry. I came to speak. But sometimes, your heart speaks louder than your words." Jasmine leaned in beside her, not interrupting, just present. Alexandria looked up, scanning the crowd, eyes filled with something unshakable. "I'm tired of being strong in silence, of being told to sit down, to wait my turn, of watching people I love get buried while the world moves on." And that's when it happened. J.D. Vance stood up. Everyone held their breath. He didn't speak. He just walked over, slowly, then knelt beside the chair. "I didn't come here to cry either," he said. "But maybe that's exactly what we needed." AOC didn't move, but she whispered, "Then let's stop performing and start healing." It was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning, and the whole world felt it. Just as the silence began to settle, a stagehand walked briskly onto the set. She whispered something into the moderator's ear and handed him a small folded note. Confused, the moderator looked at it, then cleared his throat. "We've just received a message," he said, "from someone who asked not to be shown on camera, but they were here earlier tonight." He glanced around, then read aloud. "I was going to end my life this week. I've lost everything. A house, a daughter to fentanyl. I was invisible until tonight. Thank you. For the empty chair, for the tears, for not yelling, for remembering me." Gasps rippled through the room again, but this time they weren't shocked. They were sobbing. Jasmine closed her eyes, her hand on her chest. AOC bowed her head. J.D. Vance swallowed hard. "Can we meet them?" Jasmine asked softly. The moderator paused, then looked off stage and nodded. The woman in the green dress stepped back out, quiet, humble, and holding her purse like armor. She didn't speak. She just took the chair again. And this time, she wasn't sitting alone. One by one, audience members rose from their seats and sat beside her. It started with the woman in green, then the man in the hat, then a nurse in scrubs, then a boy, no older than 16, trembling as he walked. Within minutes, the stage was no longer a debate set. It was a circle, a gathering of people from all walks of life. J.D. Vance stayed standing. "I came here to talk policy," he said. "To defend a man I believed stood for something." He looked at Trump, who remained stone-faced. "But tonight, I saw something different. I saw pain. I saw courage. And I saw leaders who didn't just talk. They listened." AOC didn't gloat. She nodded. Jasmine turned to the crowd. "This is what America looks like, not left or right, just human." Tears flowed freely now, even from people who'd come to oppose her. A woman whispered, "I lost my son too." A man answered, "I've never said this before, but me too." The circle held, the cameras rolled, and for the first time in years it didn't feel like a TV show. It felt like healing, and millions watching from home just wept. As the circle grew tighter and hearts cracked wide open, one figure remained still, untouched by it all. Donald Trump. He hadn't said a word in over 30 minutes. He leaned toward the moderator. "Cut the cameras," he muttered. But the moderator didn't respond. The cameras kept rolling. Trump stood, buttoned his jacket, and turned to J.D. Vance. "You're either on my side," he said sharply, "or you're not." Vance didn't move. "I'm on the side of truth," he answered. "And for once, that doesn't come with applause." Trump stared at him, then without another word, walked off the stage. No drama, no outburst, just quiet rejection. And it was louder than a shout. The audience didn't cheer, they didn't jeer, they just turned inward, toward each other. Jasmine stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "What just happened tonight?" she said, her voice cracking. "Wasn't politics. It was what happens when pain stops hiding." AOC stood beside her. J.D. Vance, too. No podiums, no scripts. Just 3 leaders. And a circle of broken but brave souls. The internet didn't just go viral, it stood still. Because something real had happened. Something that reminded people they weren't alone anymore. J.D. Vance stood alone on stage now, apart from the circle, eyes heavy. He took a deep breath, then did something rare for a politician. He told the truth. "I used to think strength meant power, talking over people, winning. I called it leadership." He paused, voice low. "But I was wrong. I saw more strength tonight in the tears of a grieving mother than I've ever seen in any war room." He looked at AOC, then Jasmine. "I didn't come here to change. I came to win. But maybe change was what I needed most." A quiet gasp rippled across the crowd. AOC blinked back tears. Jasmine stepped closer, reaching for his hand. And in front of millions, J.D. Vance did something unimaginable. He bowed his head. No speech, no pride, just silence. A different kind of power. And in that stillness, people didn't see parties. They saw people, real people, and from homes, hospital beds, shelters, classrooms. People cried. Because maybe this wasn't just a debate. Maybe it was the beginning of something they'd stopped believing in. Hope. The moderator cleared his throat, eyes red. "We're out of time." But no one moved. No one wanted it to end. Jasmine Crockett stepped forward one last time. Her voice was quiet but full of thunder. "I've been called many things," she said. Loud, angry, disrespectful. She smiled faintly. But tonight, none of that mattered. Because tonight we didn't yell. We listened. We cried. We remembered. She looked out into the crowd. At the mother who came back. At the man in the hat. At every person watching from home who thought they were forgotten. She looked into the camera, eyes fierce and full. "You are not forgotten." Then she turned toward J.D. Vance. Not with bitterness, but grace. "Thank you for listening. That's the start of everything." He nodded silently. And finally she stood beside AOC. 2 women, 2 fighters, different voices, one truth. "I don't know what happens after this," Jasmine said, "but I know one thing. America saw itself tonight." Then, slowly, the lights dimmed. No music, no cheers, just stillness. And in that stillness, the whole nation held its breath. The broadcast ended, but the impact didn't. Clips of the debate flooded every screen, from TikTok to cable news, from classrooms to nursing homes. But it wasn't AOC's bold statement, or J.D. Vance's surrender, or even Trump walking off. It was the woman in the green dress, and the circle, and the moment Jasmine said, "You are not forgotten." People cried. A retired Marine wrote, "I've never cried at a debate. Tonight I cried for an hour." A high school teacher shared, "My students watched this together, then they hugged. They've never done that before." Even political opponents shared the same line. This wasn't about sides. This was about soul. And as the dust settled, something rare happened. Hope trended. Not rage, not division. Hope. If this story touched you, if you felt seen, heard, or less alone, don't scroll away. Share your story in the comments, like if you cried too. Subscribe if you believe politics can have a heart again. Let's rebuild, not just a country, but each other.